I found an old $1 lottery ticket in my jacket pocket, bought a year ago. I was about to throw it out, but checked the numbers first. I had won $81 million. But when I called the number, they went silent on the other end. Good day, dear listeners. It's Diana again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way I can see how far my story has traveled. The jacket had been hanging in the back of my hallway closet for over a year. It was a dark olive parka I used to wear during the winter commute to work. The kind of coat that's too warm for October but not quite warm enough for January, so it ends up being nobody's favorite and gets pushed behind everything else. I hadn't thought about it since the previous February. That particular Saturday morning in November, I pulled it out only because I was finally doing what I'd been putting off for months. Cleaning out the closet, sorting things for Goodwill, reclaiming a little space in a home that suddenly felt both too large and too empty. My name is Sarah Mercer. I was 44 years old, a middle school librarian in Columbus, Ohio, and I had been divorced for 3 years. Not the dramatic kind of divorced. No screaming fights, no thrown dishes. Just the slow, suffocating kind where two people realize one morning that they've been living like polite roommates for so long they can no longer remember why they ever shared a bed. My ex-husband David had moved on with shocking speed, remarrying within 14 months to a woman named Karen Holloway who was 31, worked in real estate, and had the particular kind of confidence that comes from never having doubted herself for a single day. I tried not to think about either of them. Most days I succeeded. My life was quiet. That's the word I always used. Quiet. I had my routines. Coffee at 6:15, the drive to Lincoln Middle School, the smell of old books and pencil shavings, dinner for one, television, sleep. On weekends, I walked the dog, a 7-year-old golden retriever named Biscuit, and occasionally had dinner with my sister Diana or my best friend Maggie. It was a small life, but it was mine, and I had built it carefully out of the wreckage of the marriage, and I was, if not happy, then at least steady. That morning, I was wearing an old sweatshirt and drinking my second cup of coffee when I pulled the olive parka off its hanger. The closet smelled like cedar and something faintly floral. A candle, maybe, from some Christmas ago. I checked the pockets, out of habit. Right pocket. A crumpled gas station receipt, a chapstick with the cap missing, a single brown mitten. Left pocket. A folded piece of paper, soft at the creases from having been folded and unfolded more than once. I almost threw it away without looking. My hand was already moving toward the trash bag. I don't know why I stopped. Call it instinct. Call it boredom. Call it the particular way the paper was folded, neat, deliberate, as if the person who had folded it had thought it might matter someday. It was a lottery ticket, Ohio Jackpot, the $2 scratch and match game, except it wasn't a scratch ticket, it was a draw ticket. The kind where you pick numbers or let the machine pick them for you, and then you check them against the weekly drawing. I remembered buying it now. It had been a year ago, maybe 13 months. I'd stopped at a BP station on Morse Road after a parent-teacher conference that had gone badly, the kind of meeting where the parents blame you for their child's failures, and you sit there nodding and swallowing the things you actually want to say. I'd bought a Diet Coke and, on a strange impulse, a $1 lottery ticket. The cashier had been a teenager with paint-stained fingers. I remembered thinking, $1. Why not? I had never checked the numbers. I stood in the hallway holding the ticket for a moment, then carried it to the kitchen table. I opened my laptop and typed in the Ohio Lottery website. I found the archive of past drawings, scrolled to the right date, and began comparing numbers. The first number matched, then the second, then the third, 4th, 5th. I sat very still. My coffee went cold beside me. Biscuit came and pushed his nose against my knee, and I didn't move. All 6 numbers matched. The jackpot for that drawing had been $81 million. I read it 4 times. Then I closed the laptop and opened it again, as if the numbers might have rearranged themselves into something more believable. They hadn't. I sat at that kitchen table for a long time. I couldn't tell you how long, just looking at the ticket lying on the laminate surface between my coffee cup and a half-finished grocery list. Then I picked up my phone and called the number on the back of the ticket. It rang twice. A woman answered, professional, brisk. Ohio Lottery Claim Center. How can I help you? I told her I had a winning ticket. I told her the date and the game, and, because she asked, I read her the ticket ID number printed along the bottom edge. There was a pause. Not the pause of someone typing information into a computer, not the pause of someone pulling up a file. It was a different kind of pause. Sudden, complete, and weighted with something I could not name. The kind of silence that has texture. Ma'am, the woman said finally, and her voice had changed. Could you please hold for just a moment? The line went quiet. Not hold music, just silence. And in that silence, standing in my kitchen in an old sweatshirt with a winning lottery ticket in my hand, I felt the first cold finger of something I hadn't felt in years. Fear. The hold lasted 4 minutes and 23 seconds. I know because I watched the timer on my phone screen the entire time, standing at the kitchen counter with my back pressed against the cabinets as if I needed the support. Biscuit sat at my feet, ears slightly raised, reading something in my posture that told him this was not a normal Saturday morning. When the woman came back on the line, her voice had been replaced by a man's, older, careful, the kind of voice that belongs to someone who has been trained to reveal nothing. Ma'am, I'm sorry for the wait. My name is Gerald. I'm a senior representative here at the commission. I want to make sure I understand. You're saying you have a jackpot plus draw ticket from E, and he read back the date. Yes, I said. That's the one. And you're calling to inquire about the status of that ticket? I'm calling to claim it, I said. The numbers match, all 6. Another pause. Shorter this time, but still there. I understand, Gerald said. Ma'am, I want to recommend that you do not share this information with anyone at this time, anyone at all. I'd encourage you to come to our main office in person with the physical ticket, and we can walk you through the official claims process. Can I ask, is the ticket currently in your possession? It's in my hand right now, I said. Good. Please keep it somewhere very safe. A fireproof lockbox if you have one. If not, consider your bank's safe deposit box until your appointment. We can schedule you as early as Monday morning. He gave me an address. He gave me a reference number. He told me again not to discuss this with anyone. He said it like a warning, not a suggestion, and when I hung up the phone, my hand was shaking. I stood in the kitchen for a very long time after that. Why the silence? That was the question I couldn't get past. A lottery official does not go quiet when you report a winning ticket. That's not how it works. You call, they verify, they congratulate you, they schedule your appointment. There are procedures. There is a script. Gerald had gone off script the moment I read him that ticket number, and the woman before him had gone off script even faster. What did they know about my ticket that I didn't? I made myself sit down. I made myself eat something. Toast mechanically, standing over the sink. I took Biscuit for a walk around the block in the cold November air, and I let the rhythm of his breathing and his confident trot ahead of me on the leash organize my thoughts into something like order. Here was what I knew. I had a ticket. The numbers matched. The jackpot was $81 million. The ticket was purchased with my personal debit card. I was almost certain of this because I had only stopped at that BP station because I needed cash from the ATM and ended up buying the ticket on impulse. My card. My money. 13 months after my divorce was finalized. Here was what I didn't know. Why the pause? Why the warning? Why Gerald had sounded less like a lottery representative and more like someone managing a situation. I went back inside and I did what I always did when I needed to think clearly. I went to my small home office, the room that used to be a guest bedroom and was now lined with bookshelves, and I sat at my desk. I opened a legal pad and I started writing things down. Dates, numbers. What I remembered about that day. The gas station on Morse Road, the parent-teacher conference before it, the teenager with paint on his fingers. I also did something I had never done before in my life. I searched online for lottery winner anonymous legal advice and what to do before claiming lottery prize. What I found changed the shape of my fear from vague to specific, and then, slowly, because I was not naturally a decisive person, but I had learned to become one during the divorce, from specific to manageable. Every single resource said the same things. Get a lawyer first. Do not tell family. Do not tell friends. Do not post anything online. Protect the physical ticket. Understand that in most states, winners' names become public record. And understand this. Once people know, everything changes, not just strangers, the people closest to you. I thought about David. I thought about how quickly he had rebuilt his life after we separated. I thought about Karen and her sharp, assessing eyes, and the way she had looked at me at the one awkward mutual acquaintance's birthday party where we'd ended up in the same room, like she was calculating something. I thought about David's mother, who had never liked me, and his brother, who had borrowed money from us 3 times during our marriage and never paid back a cent. I picked up the phone and put it down again. Then I picked it up and did a specific search. Columbus, Ohio Attorneys Lottery Trust Estate Planning. I was not going to call the first name I found. I was not going to do anything impulsive. I was going to be methodical, careful. I was a librarian. I knew how to research, how to evaluate sources, how to build a case from evidence. Over the next 2 hours, I found 3 attorneys who specialized in exactly this situation: large financial windfalls, asset protection, trust formation for lottery winners. I read their reviews. I read their firm bios. I chose the one who had a specific paragraph on her website about protecting clients' privacy before claims were filed. Her name was Patricia Huang. She had 22 years of experience and an office in Westerville, 12 miles from my house. I did not call her that day. I made the appointment online for Monday afternoon, 2 hours after my scheduled visit to the Lottery Commission office. Gerald had told me not to tell anyone. I intended to tell exactly one person, my attorney. That night, I placed the ticket in an envelope, sealed it, and locked it in the small fireproof document safe where I kept my passport and my will. I sat on the edge of my bed in the quiet house, and I tried to feel something coherent. What I felt instead was a low, steady hum of alertness. The particular kind that comes not from excitement, but from the recognition that something larger than you is now in motion, and the only thing you can control is how carefully you move. I did not sleep well, but I slept. The Ohio Lottery Commission office on Monday morning was not what I had expected. I think I had imagined something bureaucratic and slightly dingy. Plastic chairs, fluorescent lights, the smell of a government waiting room. Instead, it occupied a clean corporate floor of an office building in Columbus, with a reception desk staffed by a woman in a blazer who checked my ID twice before she would let me through a locked glass door. Gerald met me in a private conference room. He was in his late 50s, gray at the temples, with the careful, neutral expression of a man who had learned never to show surprise. He was accompanied by a younger woman he introduced as a claims verification specialist who had a laptop and said nothing for the entire meeting. They verified the ticket. The specialist scanned it, compared it against the master records, ran a UV check. The process took 11 minutes. During those 11 minutes, I sat with my hands folded in my lap and my face completely still, the way I had learned to sit during the worst moments of my marriage. "Ms. Mercer," Gerald said, when the specialist turned her laptop to show him something, "this ticket is valid, congratulations." He said it simply, without warmth, which somehow made it feel more real than any amount of excitement would have. The jackpot had been $81 million. After the mandatory federal and state tax withholdings, the lump sum cash option, which I had already, in my 2 days of research, decided I would take, would net me approximately $48.6 million. $48.6 million. I nodded. "What happens next?" I asked. Gerald walked me through the claims process. I would need to return with official documentation, complete a notarized claims form, and choose a payment structure. He strongly recommended, again, that I retain legal counsel before proceeding. He told me that under Ohio law, my name would eventually become part of the public record, but that there were legal structures, trusts, LLCs, that could serve as the claiming entity to provide a layer of privacy. I told him I had an attorney appointment that afternoon. Something shifted in his expression, almost imperceptibly, almost nothing, but I noticed it. A small relaxation around his eyes, as if he had been waiting to hear that. "Good," he said. "That's very wise." I left the commission office and drove directly to Patricia Huang's office in Westerville. Her waiting room had good natural light and a wall of framed credentials. She came out to meet me herself, a small woman in her early 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her head and the kind of precise attention in her eyes that I recognized and immediately trusted. I told her everything: the jacket, the ticket, Gerald, the pause on the phone. She listened without interrupting, making occasional notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, she set her pen down. "The pause," she said. "Did Gerald ever explain it?" "No," I said. "I didn't ask directly." She nodded slowly. "I'm going to find out. In the meantime, here is what we are going to do." She outlined a plan. We would establish a revocable trust, the Sarah M. Trust, which would be the legal entity to claim the prize. My name would not appear on any public-facing document until it was legally unavoidable. We would file the full claim paperwork within 2 weeks, and I was under no circumstances to discuss this with anyone until the claim was fully processed and the funds were secured. I asked how long that would take. 90 days from filing, she said, possibly less. 90 days. I could do 90 days. I drove home in the gray November afternoon feeling something new, not just the hum of alertness, but the steadier warmth of having a professional in my corner. The plan had a shape now. I was no longer standing in a hallway with a piece of paper in my hand. I was moving along a path that someone had walked before. It was that evening at home that I received the first sign that I was not moving as quietly as I'd believed. I was in the kitchen making dinner when my phone buzzed with a text from a number I didn't recognize. It said simply, "Heard you had some good news lately, we should talk." I stared at it for a long time. No name, no context. We should talk. I had told no one. I had told Patricia Huang, who was bound by attorney-client privilege. I had told Gerald at the commission, who was a government official under his own professional and legal constraints. I had not called my sister. I had not texted Maggie. I had not posted a single word online. So who had heard? I screenshotted the message and sent it to Patricia that night with a brief explanation. She responded within the hour. Save everything. Do not reply. I'll look into the Commission's internal records for any unusual access to your claim file. 2 days later, she called me. Sarah, she said, someone accessed your claim inquiry record at the Commission on the day of your initial call. The access was logged to a junior employee named Brittany Cole. She is not part of the claims processing team. She has no professional reason to have been in your file. I sat down. And Brittany Cole, Patricia continued, is Karen Holloway Mercer's first cousin. The room felt very still. David knows, I said. David knows, Patricia confirmed, and now we know that he knows, which changes what we do next. The next week moved with the strange double quality of time during a crisis. Each hour both too slow and too fast, laden with significance and with waiting. Patricia filed the preliminary trust paperwork on Wednesday. By Friday, the Sarah M. Trust was a legal entity in the state of Ohio. On the following Monday, we submitted the official lottery claim through the trust. I went to work every day. I checked out books. I helped a 7th grader find sources for a paper on the civil rights movement. I ate lunch in the break room and listened to a colleague complain about the new grading software. I kept my face entirely normal. I was very good at normal. The call from David came on a Thursday evening, 12 days after my visit to the commission. I was walking Biscuit around the neighborhood in the cold when my phone rang. I looked at the screen. David's name. We hadn't spoken in nearly 8 months. A civil, managed silence, the kind that exists between two people who have nothing left to say and have accepted that as a fact. I stopped on the sidewalk. Biscuit sat down beside me, as if he sensed we weren't going anywhere. I answered, Sarah? His voice was careful, measured. He'd always been good at measured. David. I heard something, he said. I wanted to call you directly. I thought that was the right thing to do. He thought it was the right thing to do. In 11 years of marriage and 3 years of divorce, I had learned that when David framed something as the right thing to do, he was telling you he had already decided what he wanted and was choosing the frame that made his want sound noble. What did you hear? I said. That you might have found something significant. A pause. From before. From before. The lottery ticket was purchased 13 months after our divorce was finalized. There was no before. But I understood what he was suggesting, and the audacity of it, offered in that careful, reasonable voice, made something go very cold and very clear inside me. I don't know what you're talking about, I said. His tone shifted almost imperceptibly. Sarah. I think we should sit down, the three of us. The three of us. Karen. And have a conversation, like adults, before things get complicated. Things aren't complicated, David, I said. Have a good evening. I hung up. My heart was pounding. Biscuit stood up and pressed against my leg, and I reached down and put my hand on his warm head and breathed. The street around me was quiet. A few lit windows, a neighbor's car pulling into a driveway 2 houses down, the ordinary machinery of an ordinary Thursday evening. Nothing had changed. Everything had changed. I texted Patricia the moment I got home. Her response, "Good. You handled it exactly right." Now we wait for their next move. Their next move came 6 days later in the form of a certified letter delivered to my home address. I signed for it with a feeling of grim recognition. Inside was a single page on the letterhead of a Columbus law firm, Garrett and Phelps, stating that David Mercer wished to assert a potential marital interest in any lottery prize associated with a ticket that may have been purchased in whole or in part with funds traceable to the marital estate. It was, from any rational legal standpoint, an extraordinarily weak claim. The divorce had been finalized. Our joint accounts had been closed and divided. The ticket had been purchased 13 months later with my personal debit card. But a weak claim, filed publicly and aggressively, can still cause damage. It can delay a payment, generate media attention, and most critically, it can frighten someone into settling. I drove to Patricia's office that afternoon. She read the letter, set it on her desk, and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "This is a pressure tactic," she said. "They have no legal basis. Their entire argument depends on establishing that the ticket was purchased with funds that originated in some way from the marital estate. It wasn't. I've already obtained the bank records confirming the debit card transaction. The money came from your paycheck deposited 3 days before the purchase." "What do we do?" I asked. "We respond," she said, firmly. Her response letter went out the next morning. It was 3 paragraphs long. It identified the date of the debit card transaction, the account it belonged to, and the date our divorce was finalized. It noted that the claim had no basis in Ohio marital property law. It informed Garrett and Phelps that any further attempts to interfere with a valid lottery claim could result in a counterclaim for tortious interference. Garrett and Phelps did not respond for 4 days. When they did, the letter was shorter. It said they were reviewing the documentation and would be in touch. They were backing off. Not fully, not yet. But the first pressure had not worked, and they knew it. Patricia told me this was the moment when people like David either folded or escalated. "Which do you think he'll do?" I asked. She considered this. "Escalate," she said, "but carefully. He'll try something else." That weekend, I drove to a small inn in the Hocking Hills, 2 hours south of Columbus, a room overlooking a creek, no phone signal strong enough to tempt me into checking messages. I took biscuit. I walked trails. I ate breakfast at a diner where nobody knew me. I sat by the fire in the inn's common room in the evenings and read a novel I'd been carrying around for 6 months without opening. I let myself rest, not because I was finished, I was very far from finished, but because I understood, with a clarity that surprised me, that this fight was going to require endurance, not just courage, and endurance requires recovery. I drove home on Sunday afternoon feeling, for the first time since finding the ticket, something close to calm. David's next move was not a legal letter. It was softer than that, which meant it was more dangerous. A week after I returned from Hocking Hills, I received an email, not from his personal address, from Karen's. This surprised me enough that I read it twice before I understood what it was. It was, on the surface, conciliatory. Karen wrote that she and David were not looking for conflict, that they had both been thinking deeply about the situation and wanted me to know that their intent had never been to upset me, that they understood this was an incredibly significant moment in my life and that they respected that. That family, she actually used that word, family, as if our divorce had never happened, should find ways to support one another in times of change. She proposed a figure. If I would agree to a private settlement, no courts, no further attorneys, just a signed agreement between the 3 of us, they would accept 30% of the net payout, 30% of $48 million. $14.4 million for a ticket they had no legal claim to, in exchange for their silence and their agreement not to pursue further litigation. I read the email a third time, very carefully, looking for the emotional architecture of it. It was skillfully written. Karen was a real estate agent, and real estate agents know how to make things sound reasonable. The conciliatory tone, the word family, the framing of 30% as somehow modest, even generous on their part, rather than what it actually was, extortion dressed in a linen blazer. I forwarded it to Patricia without comment. She called me within the hour. "This is good," she said. "Good," I said. "Good for us. They've made an offer, which means they know their position is weak. You don't offer a settlement when you believe you can win. You only offer a settlement when you're trying to avoid losing." She paused. "Do you feel any temptation to accept?" I thought about it honestly. $14 million was still a life-changing amount of money. And there was a version of me, the version that had spent 11 years in a marriage, where the path of least resistance felt like survival, who might have looked at that number and thought, "Is this really worth fighting?" But that version of me had learned something. Over 3 years of living alone in a quiet house and building a life from scratch and making hard decisions without anyone to defer to. She had learned that accepting what was not yours to give and what was not theirs to take was not compromise. It was surrender. And surrender never ends where you think it does. "No," I said. "No temptation." "Good," Patricia said again. "I'll send a response declining the offer and reiterating our position." After I hung up, I sat in the quiet of my living room for a moment. Then I did something I hadn't done in nearly a month. I called my sister. Diana was 3 years older than me, lived in Cincinnati, and had the particular quality of older sisters who have always been the steady one. Not dramatic, not given to speeches, but present in the way that genuinely matters. She picked up on the second ring. "Sarah?" she said, the way she always said my name, like she was confirming I was actually there. "I need to tell you something," I said. "I need you to not tell anyone yet. Can you do that?" A brief pause. "Yes," she said. "Of course." I told her about the ticket. I told her about the trust, about Patricia, about David and Karen's claim and their settlement offer. I told her all of it in one long stream, and when I finished, the line was quiet for a moment. "Are you okay?" she asked. "I'm okay," I said. "I just needed someone to know." "You were right not to call me sooner," she said, which was exactly the right thing to say. Not hurt, not offended, just clear-eyed. "And you're right to fight it. Don't settle. Not $1. 2 days later, I told Maggie. We met at a coffee shop on the east side. Maggie had been my closest friend since graduate school, a woman of fierce practical intelligence who worked as an ER nurse and approached problems the way she approached difficult patients, directly, without flinching. She listened over a large latte, both hands wrapped around the cup, not interrupting. When I finished, she said, "What do you need from me?" Not "that's incredible," not $81 million. Just, "What do you need?" "I just needed to say it out loud to someone who loves me," I said. She reached across the table and gripped my hand once, briefly, firmly. "You've got this," she said. "You have always been smarter and tougher than you think you are, and David has always been weaker and more afraid than he lets on. Those things haven't changed." I drove home from that coffee shop in the November dusk feeling, for the first time in all of this, genuinely not alone. Not because I had needed rescuing, I didn't, but because the weight of carrying a secret is different from the weight of carrying a burden, and what I'd been carrying was both. Diana and Maggie hadn't lightened the load. They had simply stood beside me under it, and that changed everything. They came to my house on a Saturday afternoon in December, 3 weeks before the claim was scheduled to be finalized. I had not invited them. I had not responded to Karen's email beyond Patricia's formal reply. I had not called David back. I had maintained the silence between us the way you maintain a closed door. Not dramatically, not with effort, just by not opening it. And then I heard a car in my driveway. Biscuit heard it first. He stood up from his spot on the rug and walked to the window and looked out with his ears raised. And I came to look over his head, and there was David's silver Audi, and David and Karen getting out of it, dressed as if for a casual lunch, him in a dark jacket, her in a camel coat that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. My first instinct was to not answer the door. My second instinct, the one I followed, was to answer it, because I was tired of retreating, and because there was nothing they could say or do in my living room that would change anything that was already in motion. I opened the door before they could knock. Karen smiled first. It was a warm smile, practiced and convincing. She had the kind of face that could produce warmth on demand like a switch. "Sarah, hi, thank you for seeing us." As if I had invited them, as if this were a social call. "Come in," I said. My voice was level. I stepped back and let them into the hallway. We sat in the living room, them on the couch, me in the chair across from them with Biscuit at my feet, which I was grateful for. There is something stabilizing about a dog's warmth against your leg. David started. He said he understood that things had become legalistic, that he regretted that he had always had respect for me and our shared history, that he was not trying to take anything from me. He used those exact words, "take anything from you," but that he genuinely felt there were aspects of our financial history as a couple that warranted a conversation. He asked me to think about our 12 years together. It was 11, but I did not correct him. And whether I really wanted to handle this through lawyers and courts rather than like two adults who had once loved each other. He was good. He had always been good at this. The measured voice, the appeal to the past, the implicit suggestion that resistance was graceless and emotional, while agreement was mature and rational. During the marriage, I had often felt that his arguments were unanswerable. Not because they were logically sound, but because they were emotionally constructed to make disagreement feel like pettiness. I was older now. I had had 3 years of quiet and a very good attorney, and I could see the architecture of it clearly. Karen spoke next. She said she knew they hadn't always gotten off on the right foot, a masterful understatement, and that she hoped we could move past that. She said she genuinely wanted what was best for everyone. She reached into her bag and produced a document, printed, stapled 2 pages, and placed it on the coffee table between us. It was a revised settlement agreement. The number had changed. 20%, approximately $9.7 million. "We've reduced it significantly," Karen said. "We're not greedy people, Sarah. We just want fairness." I looked at the document on the coffee table. I did not pick it up. Then David did something that told me more than anything else had. He leaned forward slightly, and his voice dropped to a register that I recognized from the marriage, the one that meant the performance was ending and the real thing was beginning. "Sarah," he said, "you should know that our attorney believes we have a viable claim and a public legal dispute. With your name attached to an $81 million lottery ticket would be very visible, very public. There would be press. There would be people coming out of the woodwork. Do you really want that?" He paused. We're offering you the quiet way out. The quiet way out. I thought about the 16-year-old version of myself who had wanted to be a writer. I thought about the 28-year-old version who had married a man because she thought his steadiness was strength. I thought about the 41-year-old version who had sat across a mediation table from this same man and agreed to things she hadn't wanted to agree to because she was tired and sad and had lost track of what she was entitled to. I looked at David. I looked at Karen. I let a moment of silence settle. "I think you should go," I said. Karen's expression slipped. Just for a second, a flash of something that wasn't warmth and wasn't charm, before she recovered it. Sarah. "The ticket was purchased 13 months after my divorce was finalized," I said, "with my personal funds. Your attorney knows this. My attorney has the bank records. There is no legal basis for your claim, and if you pursue it, my attorney will file a counterclaim for tortious interference and malicious litigation. You should have that conversation with Garrett and Phelps before you take any further action." I stood up. David stared at me. He looked, for one unguarded moment, genuinely startled, as if the woman sitting across from him had been replaced by someone he didn't quite recognize. Karen stood up too, gathering the settlement document from the table with quick, tight movements. "You're making a mistake," David said at the door. His voice had lost the measurement now. There was something thinner under it. "Maybe," I said. "Goodbye, David." I closed the door. I stood in my hallway for a long moment after I heard the car back out of the driveway. My hands were very slightly trembling. Biscuit pushed his nose into my palm. I was afraid, a clear, cold fear that had nothing to do with cowardice and everything to do with the recognition that they would not accept this quietly, and that whatever came next would be harder. But the fear didn't hollow me out the way I'd expected. Instead, it settled into something dense and useful at the center of my chest, something that felt a great deal like resolve. I picked up my phone and called Patricia. "They came to my house," I said. A pause. "Tell me everything," she said. The hearing was scheduled for the 3rd week of January. I drove to the Franklin County Courthouse on a morning so cold that the concrete steps had been salted twice and still gleamed with a faint residue of ice. I wore the black wool coat I had bought the previous spring. A small thing. Deliberate. The kind of thing you wear when you want to feel like the person you intend to be that day. Garrett and Phelps had pursued the claim after all. After David and Karen's visit to my house, Patricia had anticipated this. She had spent the following weeks building a case that was, as she described it, waterproof. I sat beside her at the plaintiff's table and watched the courtroom fill. David came in with Karen and their attorney, a man named Terrence Garrett, mid-50s, practiced and expensive-looking. David was in a gray suit. Karen wore navy. They sat down without looking at me, and David's jaw was set in the way that meant he was managing something. Judge Elena Voss presided, a woman in her early 60s with close-cropped gray hair and the particular economy of motion that belongs to people who have spent decades inside courtrooms. Garrett opened for David. The argument was what I expected, that during our 11 years of marriage, Sarah Mercer had developed financial habits, financial patterns, and a financial foundation, his words, that were the product of a shared economic life. That the lottery ticket, though technically purchased after the divorce, represented a continuation of patterns established within the marriage. He was vague in places that required precision, and I watched Judge Voss's face and saw that she noticed. Then Patricia stood. She placed 3 documents in front of the judge. The first was the bank statement showing the debit card transaction. My account, my paycheck, my purchase, dated 13 months and 4 days after the final divorce decree. The second was the divorce decree itself, noting the date of finalization and the complete and documented separation of all financial accounts. The third was a record obtained from the Ohio Lottery Commission through a formal records request, an internal access log showing that on the day of my initial inquiry call, my file had been accessed by one Brittany Cole, a junior administrative employee with no authorization to view claims files of that size. Brittany Cole's personnel record showed that she was Karen Holloway Mercer's first cousin, a fact she had not disclosed during her employment screening. The courtroom was quiet. Patricia presented this third document not as proof of any crime. No crime had yet been alleged, but as context, as evidence that the opposing party had obtained advance knowledge of my claim through a contact inside the commission, and that the subsequent legal action had been filed not in good faith, but as a strategic maneuver by parties who had been informed of a windfall they had no legal right to. She asked quietly that the court take note of the timeline, the internal access, the call to David, the certified letter from Garrett and Phelps, 14 days door to door. Garrett objected twice. Judge Voss overruled him both times. Then Garrett called David to testify. This was his strategy. Make it human, make it personal, appeal to the emotional weight of a long marriage and the sense that it was simply unfair for one partner to walk away with $81 million while the other had nothing. I understood the appeal. It was the kind of argument that works on people who are swayed by feeling rather than fact, and it was entirely possible that on a different day, with a different judge, it might have carried something. But David was not prepared for Patricia's cross-examination. She asked him calmly when the joint bank accounts from the marriage had been closed. He named a date. She asked him to confirm that date against the divorce decree, which she placed in front of him. He looked at it. The date he had named was 3 weeks earlier than the decree confirmed. "My mistake," he said. "It might have been the later date." Patricia nodded pleasantly. "Of course. And do you recall the specific sum in your personal account on the date the lottery ticket was purchased?" He did not recall. "Would you like to see the bank records from that period? Records that confirm that no funds from the former joint account or any shared financial instrument were transferred to Ms. Mercer's account in the 6 months prior to the ticket purchase." He said he would have to defer to his attorney on the relevance of that question. Patricia said that was fine and moved on. Then she asked Karen to take the stand. Karen was composed. She was far more composed than David. She was a woman who was accustomed to controlling a room, to managing the emotional temperature of a conversation, to presenting herself as the reasonable party. She answered Patricia's first 4 questions smoothly, with the fluency of someone who had rehearsed. Then Patricia asked her when she had first learned about Sarah Mercer's lottery ticket. A pause. "I heard about it from David," Karen said. "And when did David tell you?" "I'm not sure of the exact date." Patricia placed a document on the witness stand. It was a phone record, David's cell account, showing a call to Karen's number the day after the commission access log entry from Brittany Cole. "Would this help you remember?" Patricia asked. Karen looked at the document. Her composure did not break. She was too skilled for that, but something around her eyes changed, a recalculation happening behind the surface. "It's possible it was around that time," she said carefully. "So David called you the day after your cousin accessed Ms. Mercer's confidential lottery claim file," Patricia said. Not a question, a statement. Delivered without heat, without drama, like a fact being entered into a record. Garrett objected loudly. Judge Voss let the objection stand on one technical ground, but the information was already in the room. Patricia thanked Karen and returned to the table. She did not need to argue. The documents argued. The timeline argued. The gap between what David had said under oath and what the bank records confirmed argued. A case built on the premise that a lottery ticket purchased with a single woman's own money from her own account 13 months after a legal divorce somehow belonged to her ex-husband. That case had been, from the beginning, not a legal argument but a performance. And performances end when the audience can see the scaffolding. Judge Voss recessed for 40 minutes. When she returned, she dismissed the claim in its entirety. She noted that the filing lacked legal basis under Ohio marital property statutes, and that the evidence suggested the claim had been initiated through improper access to a confidential government record. She referred the matter of Brittany Cole's conduct to the Commission for review. I sat very still when she read the ruling. Patricia touched my arm briefly. "It's over," she said. I looked across the room at David. He was staring at the table in front of him. Karen's hand was on the edge of her chair, white-knuckled. Garrett was already leaning over to speak into David's ear, his voice low and rapid. I did not feel triumph. I felt something quieter and more final than triumph. I felt like someone who had stood in a wind that tried to move them and had simply not moved. I stood up, buttoned my black coat, and walked out of the courtroom into the cold January air. The funds arrived in the Sarah M. Trust account on a Thursday afternoon in February. Patricia sent me a text at 2:17 p.m. Confirmed. Full amount transferred. It's done. I was at work when I received it. I was sitting at my desk in the school library helping a 6th grader with a report on Lewis and Clark, explaining the difference between a primary and a secondary source. I read the text, put my phone face down on the desk, and finished the explanation. Then I went to the faculty bathroom and stood at the sink, running cold water over my wrists the way my grandmother had taught me when I was overwhelmed by something. It had always helped. The net deposit was $48,632,140. Mine. I drove to Patricia's office after work. We sat in her conference room with a bottle of sparkling water she had put in the refrigerator that morning in anticipation. A small, practical gesture that I found more moving than flowers or champagne would have been. "You should know," she said, "that Garrett and Phelps withdrew David's case immediately after the ruling. They won't pursue an appeal, but there are consequences." Brittany Cole had been terminated from the Ohio Lottery Commission within a week of the judge's referral and was facing a potential civil liability claim for the breach of confidential records. Garrett and Phelps had sent Patricia a letter expressing concern about potential sanctions, covering themselves, stepping quietly away from the wreckage as if the whole thing had been someone else's idea. Then Patricia told me the final piece. After the hearing, David had confronted Karen about Brittany, whether she had known her cousin had accessed my file deliberately. Karen had not been prepared for that version of David, real anger, the kind that looks for something to attach itself to. She had moved out of their house in Upper Arlington. The divorce papers had been filed in February. I sat with this for a moment. I did not feel sorry for David. I had spent too many years feeling responsible for his emotional weather to do that automatically anymore, but I did not feel satisfaction either. It was simply an outcome, the way a dropped stone creates ripples whether you intend them to or not. What I felt, sitting in that conference room with sparkling water in a good glass, was free. Patricia had also filed a civil complaint against David and Karen's legal team for tortious interference, using improperly obtained information to initiate a bad faith legal proceeding. David settled it quietly, through a separate attorney, for a sum Patricia described only as significant. He did not contest it. I donated the entire amount to the Columbus Metropolitan Library Foundation. I drove home in the February dusk, the sky going pink and gold above the highway, the first suggestion of winter loosening its grip. Biscuit met me at the door. I sat down on the kitchen floor with him and let him put his big golden head in my lap, and I stayed there for a long time, in the quiet I had built and kept, and refused to surrender. I was not the same person who had stood at that kitchen counter 11 weeks earlier, with a shaking hand and a lottery ticket. I was something more finished, something that had been tested along a specific line of stress and had held. The next morning, I gave my notice at Lincoln Middle School. 4 weeks, more than required, because I loved my colleagues and I loved the library, and I wanted the transition to be a good one. My department head cried a little. I brought donuts to the break room on my last day and shook every hand. I had things to do. I had a life to build. The house I bought was a renovated craftsman bungalow in Clintonville. 4 bedrooms, a deep porch, a yard with a Japanese maple that turned burning red in October. It felt like mine the moment I walked through the front door. I kept Biscuit and adopted a second dog, a black lab mix named Clover, patient-eyed and quiet. I traveled. I read. I established the Mercer Reading Fund for school library endowments in underfunded districts across Ohio. By the 3rd year, we were funding 26 schools. In the 2nd year, I met Daniel, a history teacher who volunteered for the foundation. Quiet humor, large hands, earnest conversations with 12-year-olds about World War I. We had dinner in April and did not stop after that. As for David and Karen, their divorce was finalized that summer. Karen returned to real estate. Adequate, not spectacular, with a quiet reputation for cutting corners. David moved to a smaller apartment after legal costs took a significant chunk of his savings. The lottery case had left a permanent awkwardness around him, not something I had engineered, simply the natural consequence of choices made in a Franklin County courtroom. I did not wish him harm, but I did not wish him well. That is an entirely honest and sustainable position. On the anniversary of finding the ticket, I drove back to the BP station on Morse Road, bought a Diet Coke, sat in the parking lot watching the headlights. You cannot plan for grace. You can only be ready for it. I drove home. The lights were on. The dogs were at the door. It was a quiet evening. It was mine.